Andy Polansky is the Chief Executive Officer of Weber Shandwick. He was named CEO in November 2012 after serving as a global president since 2004. He's been there for a while. There's an extensive list of awards they've won while he has been in charge. Pretty much all of the awards through the years. I don't think there's one that you guys haven't won. Both in advertising and public relations, which is important to note. So something else, over the past few years, Andy has guided Weber Shandwick to an industry-leading position in digital, social media, and content marketing. The firm has also been recognized as a top corporate responsibility advisory firm. So very important. We've been talking about that a lot. We're going to talk about that a little bit today as well. So a lot of experience over the years with Weber. You guys are doing quite a bit. Let's start off, if you don't mind, and have you tell us about your journey.
My journey?
Your journey.
Well, first, it's really nice to be here with all of you, Gainesville. My journey started actually in the newspaper business. I was always really passionate about journalism since I was a little guy, and was always involved with newspapers particularly. And did land a couple of jobs, full-time jobs as a sports writer, which is really what I was most passionate about, and then as a business and news writer. And early in my tenure in that world, frankly, I just had an opportunity. Somebody I went to school with said, "Hey, we're hiring. Why don't you come write," the way it was characterized to me, "why don't you come write for companies instead of newspapers? You'll make more money and you can travel the world." So I made a little bit more money at the time, and I did get to travel to 46 states in 4 years. It wasn't necessarily the world, but it was a fascinating experience, and I got to do a lot of different things. I was hired as an assistant account executive for what was then Bozell and Jacobs Public Relations. I worked on a heavy industrial client. Everybody was enamored of the big brands and cool brands, and I was writing about construction equipment and mining equipment. But that's what took me around the country, and I think it was an experience where I really had an appreciation for what this business is all about, and getting to meet so many different people and exposure to different cultures. And that's kind of how I started, and I just took a lot of initiative along the way and took on new roles, new responsibilities. Did a little bit of everything in the public relations field. Started out, again, corporate B2B. Did a lot of crisis work over the years, but I've done consumer marketing, financial PR, public affairs, and that was a good grounding. And that's what I love about the agency business, is you have those opportunities to do different types of work for different types of clients across industry sectors.
Great. So what would you say continues to inspire you about the field?
Well, I just think the field is so dynamic and changing all the time. And the nature of the work we do is always changing. Technology, of course, has a lot to do with that. But what inspires me is the talent that we have in our organization. That we have people who have different points of view. And it doesn't matter where you sit in the world. We have 79 offices around the world. You could be the one to come up with a great idea. You could be someone just starting out in your career, or you could be someone who's been around for a while. And that's really inspiring, right? Just to see the work, see the creative energy, see how we're solving client problems day in and day out. And it just keeps me super energized, and just love the company and love the people I work with.
That's a really good answer. Okay, so you talked about how you got started as a sports writer, and you've been in the agency for a long time. So do you have any regrets not being on the client side?
Well, I mean, I think it would have been an interesting experience to work on the client side. So it wasn't like I had an aversion, and I've certainly had quite a bit of client exposure just in my roles over the years. And I have been seconded to different corporations for periods of time to work on different assignments, crisis assignments. So I got a little bit of a taste of the inside world. But it wasn't sort of a philosophical choice. I was just always so jazzed with what I was doing in the agency business that, and I always felt challenged, and I always was getting different types of responsibilities. So I just wound up hanging around the agency. I was glad I did.
So what would you say is one of the advantages to staying in an agency like Weber for so long?
Well, I think if you're looking at an agency like Weber, we're of course global. We work with a lot of multinational clients. We're helping them solve some of their most complex challenges. And again, just the versatility, just the nature of the teams that we have that do different types of work. It's always been looking around the corner and doing something different, doing something new. All the innovation in the communications world, the marketing world. It's kind of hard to contemplate not doing it. Really, it's pretty exciting day in and day out. And it's a great career opportunity for all of you, in my view.
So we see students often don't stay in one place for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
How do you think that kind of your experience through the agency for so long and the benefits that an agency brings would work with the student desire to continually maybe seek something new instead of staying where they are?
Well, that's a great question. So I've been in the agency world for 35 years, so that's a lot of years, right? And I'm a bit of an anomaly. So I have worked not really for the same agency all those years, because we've been through a lot of iterations, different management, different brand names. But the company I started with, which I mentioned earlier, Bozell & Jacobs, is a predecessor firm to Weber Shandwick. So my service with the company is 35 years. And I think it's natural, I think, for you all, just first of all, just trying to figure out what you want to do, right? That's not easy. And that's okay. And it's okay not to even have that figured out for a while, even as you enter the workforce. And it's absolutely fine to try out different things, whether it's working for a nonprofit or whether it's doing work for a corporation, working for an agency, trying something completely different that you think would be an interesting life experience. That all makes you who you are. And we're in the point of view business, so that to me, as someone who hires a lot of young people every year, that's what makes you interesting and potentially a great advisor to our clients. So I would say in terms of how long you stay at a particular enterprise, it really comes down to people. Do you feel like you're working with people you can learn from, people you trust, people you believe in, people who have the same values you have? And then it's opportunity. You're getting opportunities to do different things all the time. For me, I was fortunate. I hung around the agency because I was always getting those opportunities.
So then, as our students are thinking about going out and looking for jobs and internships, what skills do you think suit agency work well?
Yeah, I get, of course, asked that question quite a bit. There are a lot of skills, I think, that are certainly important. Critical thinking skills. It's still important to be able to write well, and that was one of the things about. There aren't that many people in the agency business, I don't think, that came out of the journalism world anymore as reporters. But not only did that help me write well, develop a knack for writing well, but to think fast, right? But not too fast. I think you have to be an active listener. As a reporter, I was trained, it's all about getting the story. So it's about storytelling. That's very applicable to what we do, and doing that in a compelling and visual way. But it's about listening. What is the story? What is somebody else's perspective on something, and how do you be empathetic? Whether it's as someone who's mentoring someone, or as a colleague, or from a client perspective.
So coming back, talking about Weber. So Weber is...
I'm always happy to talk about Weber. It's okay with you guys.
Let's chat about Weber. So Weber's known as one of the top, if not the top, agency in the world. So what would you say really makes Weber exceptional?
Well, I think what makes Weber exceptional is our culture. And we have a highly, highly collaborative culture. It's a highly diverse company. Again, people with different backgrounds, different perspectives, different types of expertise and capability. But it's all about the culture, the values of the company. I always share with folks that, when I look at my competition, I look at ad agencies and marketing firms and other PR firms and consulting firms, lots of smart people in the industry, and some of you may wind up in those types of environments. So in order to attract the talent, the top talent, and retain the talent, you have to really have an organization that stands for something and has the right kind of values and the collaborative culture. Our people feel super connected to each other, even if they may be working across borders, and we typically work for clients in all parts of the world. So that's kind of what makes us special, I think, our special sauce. I like to think we do amazing work, and we're typically win all kinds of awards, or best campaign of the year, or best agency of the year. But I think it really, at the heart, comes down to the culture of the place, and I think that's really important for you all. Because you're trying to figure out what you want to do. You're trolling online to see what opportunities are out there. I share with people sometimes. To me, it's about the people that you meet, even more than the company. As much as I want people to come work for Weber Shandwick, you have to feel great about the people you're interacting with when you walk in the door for that job opportunity. It's gonna make you feel a certain way about that as a prospective job, as a place to potentially start building a career and learn a bit about the industry. So to me, it's about the people always.
So can you tell us how large you are and some of the statistics about Weber? They should have done the research, but just in case.
Sure. So we're a global firm. We have offices in 79 markets around the world that are owned offices, and then we have other offices that are affiliates, up to 126 offices around the world. So that's a lot of airplane rides for me, as you might imagine. Just off of one last week from Beijing. So we have offices, I'd like to say, in major, medium financial capital. So a lot of our work is for multinationals, but not exclusively. We work in cross-industry sectors, so we have a lot of healthcare clients, we have a lot of consumer products clients. So the Genentechs and the Roches and technology, we work with IBM, and in consumer we work for companies like Unilever. In financial services, we work for companies like Bank of America. So what you find at a big agency like Weber Shandwick is these blue chip companies, right, that are sometimes category leaders. That are trying to stay category leaders, but then other times we're working for those disruptive companies that are trying to win market share and try to knock off the incumbent who's had the predominant leading position in the market sometimes. So we work for different types of companies with different types of challenges.
So what would you say if you could pick either type of client, a disruptive client or a legacy client? Which one's more fun to deal with?
Well, I gotta be careful.
All of them?
But what I find, though, in all seriousness, is sometimes the incumbent companies are the ones that have the most interesting people and technology. And it's just a question of getting their message out. That might be a little counterintuitive, right? Because you always think of those disruptive type companies that are the up and coming companies, but we represent, as I said, a broad array of clients. Some would fit into each category, and I love all my clients. So.
Great answer. So let's see. So what would you say that you have done successfully in the area of diversity and inclusion? We talk a lot about how important diversity and inclusion is. Weber's been recognized as a leader in that space in our industry. What do you think you've done well? How important is it to the industry? What can you share with us around both of those?
Well, I think one, it's core to our culture and our DNA. And to me, our rallying cry internally is our difference is our strength, right? Again, we're in the point of view business. Our clients are looking for different perspective. So it's just part of how we build our teams, how we build the company, and instill that into how we think about everything, particularly talent, attracting new talent into the company. And it's certainly true here in the United States, but it's true around the world that's when we talk about our strategic priorities as a company, that is front and center. And I think it's a real distinctive quality of Weber Shandwick and a differentiator for us. When you work with major companies today, they want diverse teams. They want diverse thinking, as they should. And that's where you're going to get the best ideas.
I agree. All right, so one of the things that we talked about, we have a Center for Public Interest Communication here. Social issues are really important to the students, to business, and we know that Weber's been involved in a lot of different social issues. So can you talk about how you're seeing social issues rise in the CEO's agendas and kind of what this means for public relations?
Sure. Well, it's a fascinating time. And one of the things we're seeing is a lot of CEO activism. So I think if you poll, which we have, if you poll employees at major companies around the world, they want, 8 out of 10 employees want their leadership to step out on social issues, particularly when they believe that something's happening in the market that's inconsistent with the values of the company and the values that they believe in. And so you've seen a lot of CEOs, I'm sure, and read about a lot of CEOs stepping out on different social issues. I think that's only going to continue. I think that it's not just true here in the United States. There are cultural issues in some parts of the world, but that's not necessarily the DNA of companies to be super activist. But for the most part, there's been a pretty dramatic shift, and the data supports that. And I think, a lot of what we talk about today is talent, right? It's not just in our business. Every company is fighting for talent. And you really have to pay a lot of attention to what your employees care about. And they look at their workplace as a safe place in most cases. And so in terms of, you look at the type of research we've done on civility for a number of years now, and all the polarization we're seeing across the world, and it doesn't matter what your politics are. The reality is, right, there are people who have very strong views, and it creates a lot of friction in our society. And so corporate leaders are hearing from their employees that matters to them, and they want to create a civil environment internally. So it's interesting to see how that's become so important, and it's becoming a key decision on why people stay at companies or even why people join certain companies.
So you mentioned the research that you've done. You've done a lot. The statistics are fascinating. Do you find that you're getting more clients coming to you and asking before they take a stand or after they take a stand?
No, it's a little bit of both. One of the things we're seeing in the research that's kind of interesting is now consumers care a lot these days, as perhaps they should, about the corporations behind the brands. In other words, when you go into a store and you're purchasing a product, maybe 5, 6, 10 years ago, people didn't think a whole lot about, well, who makes that product? And what are the values of the enterprise behind that product? People care about that now. And to the extent that our research shows that, you all are quite familiar with the phrase boycotting, right? We've seen that play out very visually around the world in different situations. But we kind of look at it now in the research as boycotting. So in other words, people are actually buying products from companies where that share their values, and they believe in the kinds of things they're doing in making their communities a better place to live and work. So it's been a pretty profound shift over the last several years, and the research certainly substantiates that.
So with all the different causes that Weber's been involved with, is there a specific cause that you can talk about and share with the class, or the classes, the folks here today?
Well, I would just say in a broad sense, just to reiterate even perhaps more strongly how this shift is taking place. So there's a fairly well-known, and if you're not familiar with this, it's pretty interesting to read. Larry Fink, who's the CEO of BlackRock, it's a leading financial institution, hedge fund, manages a lot of institutional money. So if you think about public companies, you always read and hear about, or maybe you invest in companies because you're expecting them to deliver shareholder value, right? You're hoping for another good quarter of sales and profit. But Larry Fink's note was an open letter to CEOs, and it was published in the Wall Street Journal. And it talked about, it shouldn't be just about that for these companies. In order for BlackRock to continue to invest in these companies, they had to demonstrate that they were good corporate citizens, that they were contributing to society, and they were making a difference in people's lives. And to me, that's among many other things happening in them. That's catalytic, right? Because it just changes the thinking inside a boardroom. We've often talked to our clients about how reputation is so important and how it does relate to valuation of a company, and what, not just the values, but even the how the company performs. We've all seen a spectacular crisis happen and brings the company down, right? People want to leave the company, don't want to work there anymore, it brings the share price down. So I just think that it's not so much that it's one issue, because it plays out. Every company has to make a decision about whether to align with an issue or step out of an issue in some way. I think the research, honestly, is a little split in terms of, I think there's about roughly half the people feel like if the CEO is going to step out, it should be on an issue, that's important to that company's business. Whereas there's a whole other constituency that believes it's important regardless. So those numbers are also shifting. I just think that people, and look, CEOs on their own are taking more responsibility and becoming more vocal about some things that are happening in society.
It's great. It's an exciting time to be in this field, definitely. So there's some other changes that we're seeing in the industry. One of the things that you have done at Weber is you've brought in a management consulting company. Can you talk a little bit about this and kind of why you made this change and what you think it means for our industry?
Sure. So we didn't bring in a consultancy. No, it's okay. We hatched one. So sometimes we do acquisitions if we think there's an opportunity to add talent through acquisition. But most of our building is organic. So we just do it on the basis of talent that we have. And what we noticed and you all kind of live in this environment and you see everyone talking about disruption, transformation. 75% of all transformation initiatives, according to any leading authority on the subject, fail. And they fail because there's a lack of engagement with stakeholders throughout the process. And we just felt strongly that our heritage in employee engagement, in advising companies around these business transformation initiatives, the fact that we had the creative firepower, so it wasn't just let's advise a company on how to do this, let's actually help them do it. So we decided to, fairly recently, launch a company called United Minds. And it's just interesting to consider in a client context. About 60% of our business is marketing oriented and about 40% is corporate and public policy. And the consulting practice kind of fuses them together, right? Because a lot of our clients want us to take this holistic view and to have a perspective in terms of what's the context, what's the operating environment, and then how do I market my product given that. And the type of expertise we have at United States is very much called upon in those kinds of situations.
That's great. So everyone's had challenges along the way in our careers. This is actually my second career. And decisions that we've made that have helped us kind of learn and grow. What's something that you have experienced through your time and through your career that's really had an impact on your career?
Well, I think there are a lot of things you naturally reflect on. I feel blessed that I wouldn't necessarily, in an overall sense, do a whole lot of things differently. But there's this business, whether you go into advertising or marketing or public relations or some related field, it's not for the faint of heart. There's a lot of highs and lows in this business. By definition, you're winning business every day. Sometimes you're losing business. Hopefully, because it just came to a natural end, the project's over. But because of that, sometimes you're involved in, let's just say, a new business pitch, and the stakes are really high, right? It's a big contract. It's very lucrative, but it's also something that is important to the firm in whatever sense. And there've been a few occasions where I just didn't feel like we had the right game plan, right? So you always reflect on that. To me, one of the things that makes our firm really good is we have a great leadership team. We've been working together a long time. I talked about the collaborative culture, but we're restless, right? We're a restless group. And even though we've had, thanks for mentioning it, a lot of success in the awards, we've won Global Agency of the Year for 4 years in a row. We're restless. We don't think we've got it all figured out. I think in any business, it's always, to me, you should always look at a business as a work in progress. And the best businesses are always going to anticipate market transitions and have the courage to invest in talent to help you drive through those and be successful when you come out the other end. And, there probably been a few times where I felt like we didn't move fast enough. But overall, I feel really good about, the success we've had. But that was, that's looking backward. It's always about looking forward and where's the next opportunity going to be and how's that going to be a great situation for the people that work in the firm.
Hi. What was the most memorable or best piece of advice a mentor has given you?
So that's a good question. So I had what's interesting in my career is my first and probably most important mentor was a client. So it's kind of an unusual thing where you're working for an agency and the client is paying you for your advice. And it's a guy, he's still a dear friend of mine. His name is Dick Johnson, and he was the director of corporate communications for Ingersoll Rand Company. And I worked very closely with Dick early in my career in some very sensitive situations that involved people's livelihood, right? Sometimes it was a dispute at a plant or a litigation issue or whatever it might have been. And he just instilled on me how important. It was really more from observation. It wasn't like he said to me, this is what you need to do. But what impressed me is it was all about empathy, right? Trying to be listen to what people were saying. What do they care about? What are their concerns? Before he was a skilled communicator, but he didn't necessarily feel compelled to, race in the room and talk about what made sense or everything that was going to happen. He wanted to hear what people were feeling and thinking and adjust the approach based on that. And so I just learned a lot. Plus, he was a magician, So, if you want any bad magic tricks, come see me later. There was something cool about that, right? He's like this. He can own a room just by showing some sleight of hand magic tricks. So I forgot
Diverse
something.
skills.
Yeah.
Thanks, Emmanuel Pearson. And with CEO activism being the rising trend, what is your plan for retaining consumer interest and staying ahead of the competition?
Well, if the question's about like if CEO's activism is a rising trend, and as it relates to our business, like building our own consumer business, or just want to make sure I understand your question.
Yes, with your own consumer business and those that you.
Yeah. No, it's a great point because that's a balancing act, right? Because you always have different stakeholders and all these constituencies, and it's complicated, right? How do you balance that all? And so I think you have to start with your employees and your customers. And what do your customers care about, and what do your employees care about, and as it relates to activism? And is that going to help your business or hurt your business, or is it just the right thing to do? Right? It should never be done candidly in a way that has a detrimental impact on your bottom line. The research would suggest that it shouldn't. That people certainly care or want corporate leadership to take a stand on certain issues. But you have to be very thoughtful about it, very measured about it, and just with respect to the other balancing act is just time. Time is precious, right? If you're a leader of a company, you have to spend time with your shareholders or the investment community. If you're a public company, you have to spend time with your customers, prospective customers, sometimes government regulators, employees. I mean, there's all kinds of things to consider, and you can never take your eye off any of the balls, right? You have to make sure you're surrounded by great people who are making sure that they're driving the performance. It's all about having a high-performing company, right? So how do you project to the market that you stand for certain values, but also you're selling a lot of product at the same time? It's a balancing act, but it's something that best companies do day in and day out.
Do you have any advice for us as students, networking, internship? What do you think is the most important for us now?
Well, I would say that's a good question. Not unanticipated, by the way. So I would think broadly, right? So the universe of possibilities is broad. In terms of I always talk to people about regardless of what you decide to do, the skill set that you are developing is so meaningful in the world, right? You can apply that in so many different ways, even for nonprofit. But I would look at nonprofits, I'd look at corporations, I'd look at different types of marketing agencies, consultancies, and again, try to do as much due diligence as you can. And when you show up at these places, how do you feel when you're walking through the door? Does it feel like an inclusive environment? Does it feel diverse? Does it feel energetic? Does it feel interesting? What are when you meet it could be the recruiter, it could be a principal of the company, it could be anybody. Do you feel a connection to that person? Is it someone you can learn from? Is it someone who's interesting? And then this is when I get flooded with resumes. I would say, be bold, right? So, I think that sometimes people feel they're trying to understand the process, right? So you go to the website and you apply for these internships or full-time positions. You should do that, but you should try and break the rules a little bit too, right? If you're a little bit more clever than that, you on a parallel path, maybe you say, I heard you speak at the University of Florida not too long ago, and I'd love to work at your firm, or I see you're doing some interesting thought leadership on civility, and here's what I think about that, And so try to come at it a little bit differently, because honestly, it is very competitive, right? We hire a lot of people every year, but a lot more people apply. And so you want to stand out, and you don't want to just do the stuff that, seems more the traditional route. Do that stuff, but try to go beyond that too.
Thanks.
Out of all the guys that were with, what would you say was the most challenging project that you have to face, and why?
Well, there are always, we're in the problem solving business, so there are always interesting challenges to tackle. One of the things I'm really proud of is sometimes we support companies when their employees may be in harm's way, or their customers may be in harm's way because of a natural disaster, for example. And one of the things we did following the Mexico City earthquake a few years ago, people on my team, this was what we did, so not so much work when we were supporting a client. If you think Airbnb and the platform that they've built, our team members had an idea that a lot of people were unfortunately displaced by the earthquake, had no place to live. And so they created this platform, right, where you can go online, go someplace where you can get online. And then people were posting where they were opening up their homes for people to stay that were displaced by the earthquake. That was obviously a really emotionally wrenching situation. We had actually, that obviously happened in Mexico City. We had our teams in Brazil supporting them. They came up with the idea, and it just a lot of people in my firm got involved. And I think one of the challenges sometimes is, it's the work we do can be very important, but it can be emotional too, right? Because we're doing work in some difficult circumstances sometimes, like that. And that's challenging. It's challenging on a human level, right? And but it makes a difference, and that's just something I was really proud of that we did not too long ago.
Using your skills for good.
You should always do that, and I think sometimes people don't fully appreciate how important communication skills are. And how needed they are for so many different types of organizations. And regardless of what you wind up doing, you're obviously here because you have an interest in communications, in marketing, right? And that's a skill set that can make a big difference to a lot of important causes.
All right, so you mentioned the blurring of the lines between advertising, public relations, and marketing. And I was just wondering, as somebody who has worked in all realms of communications, can you describe the dichotomy of that industry and where you see that progressing into the future?
If I had a crystal ball. Look, I think there's always a lot of speculation. Our industry is evolving just like all industries are evolving. There is, in some respects, a blurring of the lines because different types of consultancies are building out different creative capabilities. In the end, though, it's about the talent, right? So you can go to market with a certain proposition that seems a little close to what somebody else says they can do. But if you're truly a company that's attracting and retaining the best talent, and you do, in fact, come with the best ideas, you're going to win market share, just like in any business. You have a better product, you have a better service, you're going to win market share. And that's what it's all about. I welcome competition. I think it keeps you on your toes. There's a lot of great firms in our industry, a lot of agencies that we compete with that have super smart people. I think that's terrific. And I'm very respectful of what they've done to build their respective firms, but we focus on what we can control and how we can build a better firm, with a better product or with better ideas. And it doesn't matter if you're an ad agency or a consulting firm or a PR firm. That's what it's all about.
Hi, Andy. Appreciate you being here tonight. My question is, you brought up the word talent a few times, and you talked about a few skills that you would, prefer to future doc candidates, from storytelling to writing skills. And I think you kind of touched on this when you were talking about technology, but we hear a lot, students should be great at data analysis. I think that's kind of like a buzz term that's going around.
It is a buzz term.
So how important is that at Weber, and what suggestions do you have for all of us as we kind of, work toward having those skills before entering our jobs?
Yeah, great question. And it is front and center to a lot of what we're thinking about and building these days. We're both, at the entry level, but at all levels are building up our analytics capability. I talk about how we're in a prove it works world. So clients, it's not just about having the best idea. It's about being able to demonstrate that it's going to make a difference to the business or shift stakeholder behaviors in some form or fashion. So, I think in the next several years, that's just going to become more and more important because it's not just about the data, right? There's lots of data out there, as we all know. It's about the insight. So how does the data inform the strategy? And you formulate an insight. The insight is the catalyst for the ultimate idea, right, that you might bring. And again, I think that's kind of what's interesting about our profession is we now are at a place where we have great data and analytics capability, but at the strategic front end, but we also do great creative execution. That's one of the differences in my view between an agency like ours and a consulting firm, because we're built to do that at all ends of the spectrum. So it's a great skill set, an important one, and it's very much in demand.
Earlier you mentioned an article you suggested us reading. Do you have any other recommendations for books or anything?
Well, I have a lot of suggestions, but one thing I would recommend, there's lots of great books. I'm a big, there's one interesting book if you're interested in what's happening in the marketing services industry, or how I like to say the marketing solutions industry. There's a book by Ken Oleta called Frenemies, and it speaks to the competitive forces, but more so a lot of things that are happening in the media world, which of course are the underpinning to what's happening in the agency world and what corporations are facing. But I would strongly recommend that one of the things that I have always done that has served me well is I read the traditional media all the time. I read the Wall Street Journal and the New York Times when I wake up every morning. I read Axios, which is and some of this stuff I know time is short sometimes, but there's some amazing content now that gives you some really important context, whether it's Axios, whether it's Fortune's, Alan Murray from Fortune does a daily newsletter. You can take 20 minutes and read some of these things and be so up to speed and enlightened about important issues and what's happening in the world. And it's fun reading. It's done well, so it's not boring or why am I doing it? And I mentioned earlier like how important it is for us to have that context and understand in a broad sense the environment where and how we're advising clients. When you do that on a consistent basis, you're going to stand out because not everybody does. So I'd strongly suggest you do that.
Okay, great tip. All right, I think that's it. But don't leave. I would love for everyone to come up and get a picture. But before we do that, I'd like to thank you for your time.
Oh, my pleasure.
Been